What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today's an exciting day because guess what? We got the brand new firewall panel to put on the C10, aka the square bodies. Now let me show you what we came up with. Well, you guys can tell this thing is pretty much ready to go, or is it, right? And what we came up with, we wanted to do something that is really not out there on the market. Everybody really sells a panel that you have to cut here, and then cut your old metal out and weld this new panel in place. And it is a lot of fabrication work, a lot of time, a lot of hours, not to mention a lot of people don't have a welder. So we wanted to come up with something different, something a little bit less time consuming and also timeless at the end of the day, something different, something that's not out there on the market. And we came up with this bad boy right here, fellas. Like this guy right here actually goes all the way across to the other side. One solid piece, fellas. This is what we came up with. And it also has the vintage air cutouts. So if you're running vintage air, it's going to have that basically already ready to go. And it's really designed for the vintage air kit, obviously for these Restomod trucks, whatever you want to call them. And really, so you don't have to buy anything separately when you buy your vintage air. It actually has a pre-made lines that stick out at that exact same spot, just like the plate they give you in this area. Now, if you have a truck that is obviously air conditioning, this is a heater only truck, but you'll have the hole here, but they still end up having you reroute your lines here and then drill out your holes here. This is obviously heater only truck, but again, this has the provisions for the vintage air. So really, this panel is for anybody renting vintage air and doesn't want to lose the integrity of the firewall and doesn't want to do all the fabrication that requires it. And again, we'll show you guys here in a little bit, but what we have to do first, if you're going to be putting this thing on, you're going to want to obviously prep the surface. Now, again, we didn't really talk about this, but we're not welding this thing on. Can you weld it on? Absolutely. If you want to weld it on, be my guest, but we're actually going to panel bond this thing on. And all the new OE manufacturers are doing it. I mean, everything new on the market now is actually panel bonded on. A lot of stuff is not even welded on anymore. And I'm telling you guys, it works. So we're going to panel bond this thing on today. I'm going to show you guys how to do that. But you definitely want to get a good prep surface. You guys can tell we have basically raw metal here. You need the raw metal for the panel bond. So make sure that you have raw metal on the firewall wherever your panel is going to sit. Now you're going to want to dry fit the panel on there. Make sure you guys got a good fitment. And then I'll show you a couple areas as well here in a minute. So what we did is we left a little bit of meat on the bone, you can say, is right in this area here, because I noticed every truck's a little bit different in this area. So you'll probably have a little bit more material here that you can grind down away later once the panel is on there. But for the most part, everything else should fit pretty much on the money. You'll see here in a minute. But you're also going to want to prep this side. And what I mean by that is actually the back side of this thing. We're going to take it and we're going to sand the back side of here. You're going to DA the back side so we get a good adhesive on the back side as well, because we're going to apply obviously the panel bond epoxy to that side and the firewall side. So let's do that real quick. And then, as a matter of fact, let me show you what you guys are going to need if you guys decide to do this. But what you're going to need, most important, fellas, if you guys, again, if you're not welding this thing on and you're going to use panel bond, you're going to need a whole lot of clamps. Now, you can get them pretty much anywhere. I got a combination of, most of these are from Harbor Freight, and this one big one is actually from Amazon. So I'll put a link down in the description below. And again, they're easy to get. And you're really just going to need an array of clamps to just kind of hold this panel to this firewall. And you're going to need a little bit of wood. So we got a whole lot of wood right there. We're going to use that wood to kind of create the pressure that we need to get a good bond to that firewall. I'll show you guys here in a sec. So the other thing you're going to need is the 3M panel bond itself, adhesive. This is the 8115. And this has a working time of 90 minutes and a 4-hour clamp time, and then a 24-hour cure time. So you're definitely going to need some of this stuff here. It'll come with basically your nozzles, but most important, you're going to need an actual gun to use those cartridges, because If you notice, one of them is bigger than the other, so you're definitely gonna need a special gun. I can put a link down in the description below for the gun on Amazon. They're pretty cheap. They're 40, 50 bucks. You can find them. They're not crazy. You actually will spend more money on the panel bond itself. So, but let's go ahead and DA the back of that panel. I'm going to show you guys a quick dry fit so you can kind of get an idea of what this thing's going to look like. But not to mention, always do obviously a dry fit, because you're going to end up having these high spots in your firewall that you're going to want to knock down. And you also have this flange here from the factory that you end up having to grind this down. Now, we already did it on this truck, but you're going to end up having a flange that kind of sticks out here, this little ring. And you're going to want to grind that down so that panel sits nice and flat. And again, any other little high spots that you find, you're going to want to knock those down a little bit. We also went ahead and cut the flanges that come out of here from the original heater box, because we find them to be a little bit in the way when your vintage airlines run through there. So we cut those down. Again, any other high spots, knock those down. That's also why you want to dry fit everything. But we're going to throw this up here. And this thing is, again, it fits so good. It's just gonna go right between your brake booster and steering column mounting bracket over here. You don't have to do anything there. And you put it just right over, just like that. It'll sit there. And then now you can kind of play with the alignment a little bit. However you want it to sit, kind of square it up a little bit. I advise you take a couple clamps and clamp it in place, and then move it around to see where your best fitment will be for your truck. And again, you can see how it runs all the way down to the other side here. It comes down here and actually goes around this area here. So you're gonna wanna make sure it's covering up all the unwanted holes, but give you guys a good idea of what that thing's gonna look like. But what we're gonna do next is we're gonna clean the surface here. We'll clean the back of the panel. And then we'll clean, obviously, the firewall with just some alcohol base. We're going to use a Prep-All. I think it's called Prep-All. And it's just basically alcohol base. Just get a good clean surface before you put the adhesive / 3M product on there. This is the stuff I like to use here. It's just a wax and grease remover. Just a little Prep-All. Put it on a rag there. And then start wiping down. Get a good clean surface. Get all that dirt and dust off of there. You don't want any of that on there. Get all the nooks and crannies. So that way, that adhesive sticks real good on there. All right, next up, we're gonna go ahead and get our epoxy out and prep this. You definitely wanna squirt a little bit of this stuff out to get the air out and extrude some of that out of there. So we're gonna go ahead and put this in our gun here. Just like that. Go ahead and put a little bit out of there. See how it comes out unevenly a little bit? We want it to come out nice and even, both of those. Just like that. Now we're gonna go ahead and put that bad boy on there. But you're also gonna need that guy still. You definitely want to reuse this guy. Just keep that nozzle on there. Now we got it tight. We're gonna pump out. See how they're both coming out now. We're gonna pour some back onto that cardboard. Okay, now we're gonna put some on the firewall first. We're gonna go ahead and just put some on here. We're gonna spread it out here in a second with our spreader. So don't worry about not covering everything. probably a little overkill, fellas, but hey, better to have more than less, you know. But you definitely want to get a good bead around the outside there. Around the outside is super important because that's what's going to create the seal to your firewall. So get a good thick bead on the outside of the panel and then work your way back inside. And it's okay if it oozes out. That's what actually you want, is you want all that to ooze out so that way it flattens and adheres to the firewall. But you're definitely going to want a second set of hands when you go to put this stuff on. I should say when you go to put the panel on the firewall, because it can get a little messy. You're gonna guide it over there, like it's just gonna like fall right in there. Yeah, nice and easy. Don't let it touch it if you can. Keep going. Keep going. We are all clamped up, fellas. I told you I was not lying about the clamps. Definitely have to pull out the clamps for sure. Again, the goal is to just try to get enough pressure on that panel to get it as flush as possible. Now, you're going to have certain areas that you just can't get a clamp in there. But again, having these holes here, not only do they serve a purpose for the air conditioning, but they serve a purpose so you can try to get a couple clamps in there to put a little pressure on this middle section here as much as possible. Along with the bottom, these little small ones work really well to kind of get this panel nice and flat here at the bottom. But I'll show you kind of what I did here on the inside. Now, this one I actually really like because this one fits through those holes pretty nice and easy, but these are a little pricier. But you can see it kind of has the arm on the backside that extends a little bit. You can see how far it comes out, and we're really able to put pressure in the middle. This one, not as much, but again, we kind of have a little bit of wood there to just try to help spread a little bit of that pressure out. But I'll show you on the other side, those clamps are nice too because you can take the top of them off and obviously slide them through on the inside. You can see how you can basically put pressure that way as well. But again, utilizing those holes for sure, definitely going to be your best friend. Again, the other clamp, you can see how far down it goes. It's pretty nice. But again, this little clamp, you can pull this off. There's a little button here, and then you can slide your rod through and then put this back on. But you're definitely going to need somebody on the inside holding this here so you can tighten it from the other side. Again, the goal is to try to get as much pressure as evenly as possible, try to get that panel sit nice and flat. Obviously, you're going to have some areas that you can't really reach just because of basically the structure of the firewall. And here, definitely, this is like a harder area to try to get pressure in this area. And it's not a huge deal. Again, as long as you get the majority of the panel in place there. And then what you want to do is you want to go back, and what I did is added a little bit more sealant down in here and more of the 3M epoxy here. And because what you want to do is seal all the edges. That's why we put that big bead on the edges, because we don't want any moisture coming through the side of the panel or the anywhere in the panel that has an edge. So you want to go back and just add an extra of the sealant, the 3M sealant, the panel bond, and any of the corners that you feel like you're not getting a lot of the oozing out, you know, just like here up top. If you're not getting a lot of the oozing out, go back and add a little bit more into the corners. That should really help create a nice seal. Same thing in here. We did that here. And then we added this little wood here in between here because we're putting pressure down here, but having this little block of wood in between the clamp actually puts more pressure on this whole section right here. That definitely helps quite a bit. Again, That big bad boy is coming in clutch for sure. But what we'll do is we'll come back here in a little bit. Well, actually, see, probably 24 hours. We'll let it sit for 24 hours. Really, clamping time's 4 hours, but we're gonna let it sit overnight and we'll be back. Not too shabby, fellas, not too shabby. Next day for sure. Of course, we got all the clamps removed, all the wood removed, and this thing is freaking solid, fellas. Absolutely solid. Of course, you got a little bit of extra adhesive on here. Now, all this stuff can be grinded off, no big deal. We even got a little piece of extra wood in here that thing got stuck to, but not a big deal. And now, again, if you guys are gonna panel bond this thing on, you definitely, again, get all your edges, get all the edges nice and sealed up. Again, use that adhesive and get all the crevices in there because, again, you don't want any moisture in this thing for sure. But again, all you got to do now, we've got a little bit of glue here. I already started sanding this stuff down, but all you got to do is take your DA or a standard.
A few moments later.
And just like that, fellas, 15 minutes of sanding and check it out. All that extra adhesive is gone. Everything's trimmed down. This thing looks freaking amazing, fellas. The amount of time and body work and metal work this is gonna save, absolutely epic. Also, remember I told you guys this little area, we left it kind of big for this area here just because every truck's a little bit different, so we even just kind of trimmed that down a little bit just to hug that curve a little bit more. Everything looks good there. Super excited for this panel, fellas. Let me know what you guys think. And would you guys weld this thing on? Or would you guys do panel bonding like we did? Let me know. Put it down in the comments below. And just like that, fellas, I mean, this thing is ready for some body and paint. Now, body and paint's a whole different story. Don't talk to me about body and paint because I hate it. We're going to send this thing off, have this thing all nice, ready to go. But we do got to close up a few more holes here and here and get rid of those. And then we already started on this side. But this is absolutely going to be a game changer for these C10s. But one last thing we got to do is actually, we got to mount our vintage air and we don't want any bolts coming through this firewall. But so that'll be on the next video, but you guys got to hit the subscribe button, the like button, and hit the bell for notifications. That way you guys can see how we do that vintage air kit with no bolts through there. And you guys already know, stay wrenching.